Buddy Hield told me in Chicago that he's been playing more pissed off of late, and he's been awesome ever since. What's been igniting that stretch? What does Buddy Hield want to do for the rest of the Pacers team? How do his stats look from then? We'll talk about Buddy Hield to open today's show, and then Pacers, Raptors tomorrow, a battle of teams with totally different styles. One team with a ton of size, one with not as much. Sean Woodley from Locked On Raptors will join us to talk Pacers, Raptors, all that coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, fun show coming your way. We're going to open talking about Buddy Hield, who's been on an absolute tear the last week or so, 2 weeks really, since he talked about playing, quote, pissed off in Chicago. He's been awesome in every statistical category, helping the team on the court, off the court, in every way, in a way that Buddy Hield never has in his entire career. We'll break all that down. And then Pacers Raptors tomorrow night. Fun game. A ton of Canadians on the Pacers versus Canada's team. Sean Woodley from Locked On Raptors will join us for 2 segments talking about that game, which will be fascinating because the Raptors' style is they have a ton of 6'7" to 6'9" guys who have length and can guck up the game, and the Pacers have basically no one that height. So a fun yin-yang style battle. We'll get to that in segment 2 and 3. Today's episode brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. Speaking of starts, let's start by talking about Buddy Hield and the way he's been able to play of late for this Pacers team. If you'll recall, I think I've said this on the show quite a few times now. In Chicago, we talked to him after the game. He had 25 points that night. At the time, it was a season high. Technically, it still is. He's tied it 2 times since then. And I said, what kind of got into you in this game? This was one of your most impactful games. He was huge for the Pacers in that game. They couldn't get him off the floor. He said he had a new mentality shift where he wanted to play pissed off. And that mentality, we talked to him after the Pelicans game earlier this week, he said is something that has continued for him. He had to mentally flip a switch, and it's been really helpful for him to do that. And the reasoning, beyond playing better, obviously, is he's trying to get better and leave a mark in his career, right? Buddy Hield turns 30 a little over a month from now, has never played in a playoff game. I think Buddy Hield, of course, wants to get better and continue to improve, as all NBA players do, but wants to really leave a mark in his career and on a young team where he can be not just a good player like he has been in the past, but also a veteran for some young guys. I think he wants to leave that mark on this Pacers team. And he's really taken on the challenge of doing that in a way that, I didn't, it's not that I didn't think he could do it. It's just that I didn't necessarily expect him to be such a valuable vet, but he's done a great job with that, right? Something I talked about with Wes Goldberg last week when we were talking about defensive leaders and how the Heat follow suit because their leaders work their butt off on defense. Buddy Hield, kind of off the floor, is that kind of guy. He's always in the gym. He's always working to get better, and he always, is around in a way that young guys will follow suit, right? Like Giannis is the guy we talked about who he works his butt off on defense for the Bucks. And so all the rest of the guys are like, well, if Giannis is doing it and he's a superstar, I should do it too. And the Bucks are awesome defensively. Buddy Hield always in the gym, always getting shots up, always working on his game, always trying to get better and now leave a mark. If you're a young player, you're going to go, oh, okay, that's what it takes. I'm going to follow suit. I want to be that player myself. That sort of leadership is valuable. Like, to peel back the curtain a little bit for our media portions of the job, when we are at practice, if we want to talk to Buddy Hield and we request him, he's almost always the last player on the court getting shots up. We have to wait longer for him than other guys because he's shooting and because he wants to get better. And I think that's endearing and fascinating and a good look at the kind of guy Buddy is and who he wants to be this year. And something else he said after the Pelicans game earlier this week is he wants to set the tone for the young guys and keep playing for a long, long time. So I think there's something about this season or this point in his career that he wants to take a step forward and be, 1, better, 2, a better vet, and 3, a guy that has some longevity, can stick around for a while, and he's been really good since that Chicago game. Let's talk some stats. Let's talk stats since that pissed off declaration in Chicago. 7 games since then, almost 36 minutes a game for Buddy Hield, 21.6 points per game, 5.0 rebounds, 3.4 assists per game. Fantastic numbers for a guy who's normally billed as a shooter. 48.7% from the field, 42.1% from deep, 90% from the foul line. He's done everything well, everything that Buddy Hield needs to do. he has done well in the stretch. And on the season, his numbers are very well influenced from that stretch to be at or above his career best numbers, right? Scoring 18.5 points per game, that would be the third best season of his career if it holds for the whole season. 5.3 rebounds per game is the best of his career, the only time he's been above 5 ever. 3.3 assists would be the second best season of his career if that holds. Above 40% from deep on the season, 58.8% on two-pointers, far and away his highest two-point percentage of his career, right? He's clicking, he's playing very well and putting up career numbers in a way that has, of course, been huge for the Pacers offense, but he's also, I wouldn't say his defense has been, he's been more engaged. His defense still needs work, but like they put him on Brandon Ingram Monday, and it was fine for a lot of the game. Ingram finally clicked in the fourth quarter, but it worked pretty well. Like there are signs of growth on the defensive end and signs of engagement that haven't always been there in his career. So it's not just offensive growth for Buddy Hield or statistical growth. It's legit impact on the court stuff and not just even the big picture stats, right? You can look at stuff like his defensive box plus minus, one of, in my opinion, the best advanced stats. Second best of his career, behind his second season in the league when he was still working to prove it, right? Finishing at the rim, 62.5% inside 3 feet, one of the best rates of his career. 3 to 10 feet in the paint, the best of his career right now, shooting 50% and killing it on long twos as well, although not taking very many of them. But still, on some of these areas where he hasn't been known to be as effective, he has been effective this year, right? He's just stepped up, improved. He's a good influence on his younger teammates and trying to be more impactful and kind of shed labels is kind of how I would describe it. I don't know if he's thinking about shedding labels, but he's playing in a way that sort of looks that way. The rim finishing, the defense, the in the lane effectiveness, decent passing and rebounding, not stuff you think of with Buddy Hield, and still has a ways to go to add those to his reputation, air quotes, I would say. But he's been playing very well in a way that he's good in those areas. And so great work from Buddy Hield to play this way and to carry this mentality game by game, and has been really good for the Pacers. Hard to get off the floor, and now his on-offs look brilliant. Better offensive rating with Buddy Hield on the floor than off. That's expected as a talented offensive player. What's not expected is the Pacers' defensive rating is actually better with Buddy Hield on the court than off right now. The Pacers' bench defense has not been very good. The biggest on-off stat to me that details how Buddy Hield helps the Pacers, when Buddy Hield is in the game, the Pacers are shooting 56.4% on two-pointers. When he's on the bench, they're shooting 44.9% on two-pointers, right? Over 10% difference. Some of that is he plays with the starters who are better. Some of that is his spacing, like we talked about before the season on the show a lot, makes the rest of the game at times a 4-on-4 game. There's more space. There's more room to operate. There's more areas to get to the rim and score. Even if Buddy Hield doesn't score himself, he adds value offensively in that way. I don't know if the defensive rating will be, it's like 3 points right now. He's a plus on the on-offs there. I don't know if that will hold. 46.4% three-point shooting for opponents when he's on the bench. Like that's unusually high. But he has been better on that end of the floor, and he's had a positive impact on both ends in a way that, that's what I talked about, his biggest value being for this team before the season on the floor is adding that spacing. But if he's doing everything, it makes everybody's life easier in every single way. I don't know if Buddy Hield can stay hot forever, right? He's adding spacing. He's adding off-court value. He's been really good. He finally showed signs of life, right? 17 points on 43.8% shooting, right? One of his only 2 below 50% shooting games since that Chicago game, right? Only twice he's been under 20 points since then. He's been awesome. That was his first kind of game, I would say. 2 for 9 from deep. That's his lowest 2-point percentage in that exact same span. Maybe he'll cool off. Maybe he won't, though. He's been that good this whole time. I don't know about his future with the team or if this has any sort of change on it, and I don't really care to talk about that. It's November 10th. Buddy Hield's playing great, and he's providing the Pacers value on the court and off the court, and I think that has been a fantastic, interesting storyline to start this season for both Buddy Hield and the Indiana Pacers. Now let's talk about the Toronto Raptors, the Pacers' opponent, tomorrow night. Sean Woodley is going to join us from Locked On Raptors. He absolutely crushes it covering that Toronto team. Lots of yin and yang in these games where the Pacers kind of dominate with good front court players and guards, and the Raptors are like, we have every forward on the planet. So it's going to be fascinating to see how those two teams guard each other, what sort of stylistic way ends up shining in this game. Before we talk about the Raptors, though, let me talk to you guys about BetOnline.net, your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there at BetOnline, from football to basketball, soccer, and even esports. They've got it all over at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts like this one, You can find those over at BetOnline as well. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Lines up for the NFL this week, the Jeff Saturday era. Beginning on the 13th, Colts in Las Vegas against the Raiders. Raiders favored by 5 points in that game. All those lines and more over at betonline.net. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action, because BetOnline is where the game starts. Thanks, everybody, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Hop on over to Locked On Sports today for your second listen today. Hear from local experts on the biggest stories and news around the sports world from the Locked On Podcast Network, available on the Odyssey app, wherever you get podcasts if you're listening now, or YouTube, where you can see it happen and the mouths move in action. Now here on Locked On Pacers or Locked On Raptors, Sean Woodley and Tony East, crossover time between two of the longest standing members of the Locked On Podcast Network. We have done.
We're the old heads, baby. The old heads.
Have we talked about Pacers Raptors games together? At least a dozen now, right?
It's got to be at least a dozen. By the number of times that people always jump into the YouTube comments when you come on the show to talk about the gentleman's club that used to exist in East Toronto called Tony's East. I know I've seen that comment at least a dozen times, so that means we've been on like a lot, even in the last year or so since we started this whole YouTube shebang.
Well, I didn't tell you until we started recording, but I'm actually opening a pub near Gamebridge Fieldhouse called Woodley Sean, so this is perfect.
Wow!
Our comment section.
Unreal.
Pacers Raptors tomorrow night. Fun games usually, except for last year when the Raptors just said, "Screw the Pacers, we're going to win by 30 every single time we play against each other." This game doubly fun this year because it's the team from Canada versus the team with all the Canadians, which will be awesome to see actually in action. And the Raptors are one of my favorite teams to dig into because every other team has like positions and guys of various heights who play those positions. And the Raptors have decided that traditional way of thinking does not matter to them. Half of their team, more than half of their team, is between 6'6" and 6'9". If you sort by that height range on Basketball Reference, there are 4 players shorter than 6'6" and 1 taller than 6'9", and everybody else is in that range. So they have just said, wings, forwards, we want all of them. How has that worked for this Toronto team so far?
I mean, pretty good. They're kind of in year 2 of the experimental phase with it, right? Like they didn't really have anything to speak of when it came to centers last year. And, Kem Birch was kind of the closest thing they had, and he was not very good because he was hurt and kind of walking around on one leg. This year, the highs, the best the Raptors have looked so far this season have come when they've been really kind of rolling out the whole Vision 6'9" thing, and they've been just like marauding in the transition game, getting turnovers. Like that's just their whole thing. Is we're longer than you, so therefore we're gonna like get into more passing lanes than you. We're going to poke more balls free, and we're gonna run it down your throats. It's been a little different in terms of the formula since Pascal Siakam got hurt last week against the Mavs. He was playing at like a ridiculous, top 5 to 10 in the league level. And he is such a driver of everything they do, half court offense, transition offense, defense. Like he is so part and parcel to everything. So they've had to change it up a little bit. And it's been the short king, Fred VanVleet, who is just sitting there looking up at all his teammates all the time. Like, hello guys, I'm down here. And he's like been fantastic. He's had 30, 27, and 32 points since coming back from his own back stiffness where he missed a few games. And so they're making it work without him. But yeah, like the 6'9" thing, having wings everywhere. We're seeing lineups where, even without Pascal, they're rolling out like OG plus Delano Banton, who's 6'9", and Thad Young and Otto Porter Jr. and Precious Achiuwa all together. Like that was an actual lineup that they used in a game, and it worked. It was... They try weird stuff, man. I like to say this is the psilocybin basketball team because it's like, the chemical and magic mushrooms that makes your brain see things the way that you've never seen things before. You kind of have to look at basketball differently to really appreciate what the Raptors are doing. And it's like, whoa, who's their point guard? The answer is they don't care, and you shouldn't care either because that's just not how they're wired. That's not how the team's been built.
It makes a lot of sense, right? Like if you have the same skills as someone else and you're taller, you're better, right? Like it's just kind of how it is in the basketball world. And so sort of as it progressed at the end of the last decade, outside of Steph, where all the superstars who had the ball at the time, LeBron, Giannis, Jokic, can do all these things and are tall, everybody was kind of like, oh, you can dribble and you're tall, you're good. And the Raptors just scooped up all those guys onto the same team, which I think is a brilliant strategy. And another part of it that you mentioned that, when I was looking stuff up beforehand, Memphis was really good at this last year, even though they weren't in this height range. But Memphis, every game said, we're going to have way more possessions in their team. We're going to get a bunch of offensive rebounds. We're going to force a bunch of steals, and we're never going to turn it over. And the Raptors, who can get all these steals because they're long as hell, and they can control the ball because they have smart players. They're 7th in offensive rebounds. They turn the ball over the second fewest times, and they force the second most turnovers from their team. So even if their guys aren't the most polished creators at their size, they just have like 10 extra chances at it than you. And that seems like it's been working for this Toronto team.
Yeah, they are all about the math game because the thing is that their offense is not awesome and their like half court offense is typically, bottom 5, bottom 10 range. It's the same so far this season, but just they get more shots off than the other team. And eventually that math is going to pay off for you. Even against the Rockets on Wednesday, it wasn't their best performance. They were, kind of looking a little sloppy at times and their defense in particular was not great. But, they got like 102 shots off to 84 for the Rockets. And eventually, you just can't overcome that math if you're the Rockets, unless you're having like a superhuman defensive game, which the Rockets are not typically want to do. So, yeah, it is really, they kind of changed things up a little bit at the start of the season. The offensive rebounding didn't really kick in until this past week since Siakam's gone out. They were just cleaning up the defensive glass and never turning it over. So they'd kind of flipped it on its head, where last year they were just pounding the offensive glass and getting their sort of possession advantage that way. Prior to Siakam going out, they were hammering the defensive glass and just running off of every single rebound they got, and it was working out pretty well for them then too. They've had to change a little bit. The offense is that much worse without Siakam, so the offensive boards are like necessary for them to get by. I think they've had 2 games in the last 3 where they've been over 20 offensive boards, so you're seeing the pivot in the sort of overall strategy there. But yeah, the whole thing for them is get more possessions and you're probably going to have a pretty good chance of winning, and they've somehow managed to do it. I believe, I'm not sure the exact figure right now, but last year they got 7 more possessions than their opponents on average per game, which is nuts. And I think they've increased that to 8 or 9 now this year. Might be even more after the Wednesday game. I haven't checked the stats, but they've somehow gotten better at their match fixing thing where they get more possessions, and it's been pretty fun to behold.
Yeah, I don't know about raw possessions, but in terms of just like the number of shot attempts, they're about 9 ahead of their opponents right now, which that's a lot of points to overcome. Yeah. Even at 1 point per possession's not that great of a team, but no, that's 9 points. That's a lot to overcome in a game. Mm-hmm. So that seems like a sound strategy. The Pacers are doing the opposite team building plan as the Raptors right now. They have no one in the 6'7" to 6'9" range on their team. What type of players have done well against Toronto this year, and do the Pacers have any of them on their roster right now?
Fast, slippery guards.
The Pacers have a lot of those.
There you go. That's kind of been their bugaboo is, especially now that Siakam's out, he's really he's such a good defender that everyone kind of has their responsibilities shift up a little bit when he's out. And so we're seeing Scotty Barnes having some trouble with guys on the wing, mostly I think in the last few games because he's been dealing with some ankle stuff, but Jalen Green was kind of just roasting him in their most recent game. Donovan Mitchell had a really great game to start the season. Really, other than Trae Young, every time they've come up against a very good guard, they've had some trouble. But, with Trae Young, for some reason, they can just stick OG Anunoby on him and he just does nothing, and it's hilarious. But, yeah, even Tyrese Maxey, for example, had that ridiculous 44-point game where he didn't miss for the first 45 minutes of action or whatever it felt like. And that's, I think, partly due to Fred VanVleet's an incredible defender. He quarterbacks the defense, but he's not the fleetest of foot at the point of attack. And it's also that the Raptors play a pretty scrambly type of defense. So if you're getting a ball swinging to a guard on the weak side, they're in rotation coming back over. They might have missed a rotation or something in their sort of haphazard, all right, we're going to over-rotate and fill in the gaps at all times. And if you miss a rotation, you're making up a lot of ground. And that gives those sort of second side guards a chance to sort of plunge into the defense and make some problems. So yeah, Tyrese Halliburton, Chris Duarte, those are the types of guys. Ben Mathurin is probably, these are the types of guys who are going to give the Raptors problems. So should make for a pretty interesting stylistic matchup for sure.
Yeah, Duarte probably won't be able to play. Actually, certainly won't be able to with his ankle injury, but I think we'll see a lot of Nembhard, McConnell, Halliburton, Mathurin. I bet you see 2 or 3 of them most of the time. And Buddy Hield also has just been running around with like a chicken with his head cut off in a good way that makes defenses rotate. And he's on fire recently. Last question for me about the Raptors. And it's not about the basketball game part of the Raptors. It's about Masai Ujiri, who's very good at building teams, built a championship contender up in Toronto after coming over from Denver, and is well regarded as one of the best executives in the league. He's good at finding talent without giving up very much to get it, which is extremely impressive. And that's obviously a good team building strategy. But just big picture, because as the Pacers are entering what they have defined as a new era on media day, right? What does Masai Ujiri do so well? And is it something that other GMs or another team like the Pacers can emulate?
It's hard to say, right? Because we're not in the meetings and all that,
Sure.
and we don't see every decision that he makes in real time. But I think two or three things kind of come to mind is like things I associate with Masai Ujiri. One is he's very patient. Like he will take his time. He will let things run their course. He is not going to, jump to any sort of conclusion. He's not going to make rash decisions. He could have fired Dwayne Casey multiple times before Dwayne Casey ultimately got fired at the end of the 2017-18 season. Keep on getting swept by the Cavs. You get swept by the Wizards in 2015. Like that could have been the end of Dwayne Casey. That could have been the end of that team, frankly. And he is just, I think he really believes in the value of kind of building something and having sort of learned institutional knowledge be part of what you've got going on. And, this even goes back to Kyle Lowry and the very first iteration of these good teams. He kind of lucked into his patience a little bit by James Dolan being a coward and not wanting to trade for Kyle Lowry because he was scared of getting waxed in trade once again by Masai. But he kept Lowry, and then from there, you make the Rudy Gay trade, and things kind of fell into place. And it was like, oh, there's something cooking here. Let's see what we got. And then it was just sort of slow, methodical additions. And so the patience is really one thing that stands to mind. But it's also the fact that he's also bold and will make the moves that need to be made when they're on the table, like the Kawhi Leonard trade, like firing Dwayne Casey after he won Coach of the Year in 59 regular season games. So he's got that sort of balance of patience, but knowing when the time is maybe up to no longer be patient. And I also think he's just really, really bought into the sort of holistic approach to building a franchise, right? The G League was such a priority for him when he came in. He drafts Bruno Caboclo back in 2014. You may remember this was a year after he could not trade up to get Giannis. He was trying really hard to do it, couldn't make it work because the Raptors didn't have their first round pick. He ends up taking Bruno Caboclo the next season, and he had to go play for the Fort Wayne Mad Ants. And he didn't really have a place to go and develop because Fort Wayne wasn't prioritizing Bruno Caboclo. And all of a sudden, the 905 comes in, and it's been one of the most successful G League franchises ever since because there's simpatico between franchise and their G League team. And so, this also applies to the way that he kind of hires and the people he brings in. He trusts a lot of people to sort of bring their expertise to the table. It's very collaborative. And so I think his big thing is knowing what he doesn't know and knowing that he can't be the be-all, end-all, and sort of trusting in smart people beneath him to make really good decisions, whether it's on the coaching staff, the upper reaches of the front office, what have you. And so those are kind of the main pillars. It's tough though, right? Like it's hard to really sort of identify why a guy is so good. There's also just the part of it where he's just a really infectious dude that I feel like people just want to work for and perform well for, because disappointing him feels like it might be the most upsetting thing in the world because of what a guy he is. So yeah, it's a lot of things, and it might be that you can't replicate Masai Ujiri, but there are certainly things that the Raptors have done that there's no reason other teams can't go and do those things as well.
Yeah, there's a lot that he does well, and I think having Bobby Webster also is a thing that he does well.
The man wrote the CBA. It's pretty helpful, yeah.
Yeah, the two of the CBA writers, ironically, Ted Wu with the Pacers and Webster with the Raptors.
There you go.
In this overlap here, which I think is interesting. But yeah, Ujiri just gets it, right? Like everything is important. You can't just focus too much big picture. You end up like a Sacramento basketball team, and you can't focus too much on just little details, or you end up being too stuck in the middle sometimes. You got to be able to identify everything. I've got nothing else on the Raptors. Sean.
Yeah.
Take it away.
We're gonna get to my grilling of Tony about the Indiana Pacers in just 1 second here. But first, a reminder, go check out Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Our boy Josh Lloyd is helping a lot of people win their leagues these days. He's also extremely popular, so maybe everyone's just doing the same moves in all these leagues. I don't know, but he's doing something right. So go check out Locked On Fantasy Basketball, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Tony, the Indiana Pacers were expected to be in the Wembanyama off. Will probably still be in the Wembanyama off. Wembanyama off? I don't know what's the nomenclature we're calling this. I don't really know. But surprisingly stout to start the season, 5-6. Tyrese Halliburton's playing, I don't know, borderline, if not full-on all-star level basketball right now. Ben Mathurin is right in there for Rookie of the Year alongside Paolo Banchero. Let's start with Halliburton. We're, I guess, less than a year still out from that trade with the Sacramento Kings. How are Pacers fans feeling about that deal right now? I know Sabonis was someone who was beloved, but it's got to be kind of awesome to have this like 22-year-old guard who just kind of controls the entire floor at all times in his place. No?
Yeah, fans love Tyrese Halliburton, and he did what he said he would do, which sounds dumb, but for a young player that's evolving into the face of the franchise, he says all the time last year, I need to be more aggressive. I need to be more aggressive. He's always been a great passer, one of the best in the league, but he would defer almost too much. And so now to become the 20-10 guy, to be hunting his own shots, to have his, what I'm going to call a signature shot. I don't know if it's there yet, but he's got this new like weird running forwards hook shot thing that goes in a lot. You'll probably see it on Saturday. You certainly will. To find the balance of aggression and still being a brilliant setup man is, one, a really fun type of player to watch, and two, made him, like you said, in the all-star mix. So to trade an all-star for a younger guy who is right in that same sort of talent tier right now and will certainly be getting better, not that Sabonis won't, but yeah, I mean, home run trade for the Pacers, given where they were last year. They needed to pull the plug on that team, and they did. And it also makes their bridge to the next era so smooth. It helps that Mathurin also has been kicking butt. But, there were 4 players in the NBA last year who averaged 9 or more assists per game. And all of them were all-stars, right? So it seems likely that if he can keep this up, he'll at least be in the mix. I think it was Trey, DeJounte, James Harden, Chris Paul, right? Like studs, right? So if he can keep that pace up, which all signs point to yes, because the Pacers are going to be awesome on offense all season. They can't guard a potted plant. But it sure seems like he's going to have a good chance to be in that mix. And they did a great job identifying his skills and getting him last February.
And then in his backcourt running mate now is Ben Mathurin, Canadian. We love it. Super exciting player in college. I can't profess to have seen all of his games with Arizona or anything like that, but he was always someone who kind of popped off the screen when you'd see highlights and things like that. But there was always a question, I guess, like how do all these raw sort of intangible skills come into one in the NBA and translate? Turns out pretty damn well, averaging 20 a game. Obviously there's going to be defensive issues with any rookie, and the Pacers are not exactly a defensively stout team. And, that's stuff that can be figured out down the line. But overall, sort of like how far past expectation has Mathurin been so far this season? And what's it been that's kind of made you get all giddy and butterfly-y whenever he does things on the floor?
And looking forward to Mathurin versus Koloko, 2 college teammates. I don't know if you saw it, but when the Pacers played the Bulls, Dalen Terry, who was also on that Arizona team, the Bulls
pretty good team.
The Bulls are up like 15 late. They put in Terry for the final minute to go against his college teammate. The shot clock's off, the game's over, and Mathurin still stole it from Terry and got fouled. Nikola Vucevic is like, "Don't do that," and all this stuff. It's like you only go against your former teammate for the first time once. So I think Mathurin will be excited for that specific matchup. But to talk about his skills and what makes him so good, it's like I'll use my favorite anecdote from the season so far, because they were doing their, just before training camp, like all their players are in town, they're scrimmaging, and they hire some local refs to come in and call fouls and this stuff. And Tyrese Halliburton said that Mathurin was complaining in these scrimmages that he wasn't getting enough calls. And Tyrese said, dude, you're a rookie. Like, you're not going to get these calls in the league. And Tyrese is like, never mind, I was wrong. He is getting these calls in the league. That's what's made him so good. He is so fearless going to the rim. 6 free throw attempts per game for a rookie is pretty ridiculous.
Nuts.
He has the highest free throw attempt rate on the Pacers amongst non-big dudes who just stand around the basket. So he is just such a fearless attacker. And that alone is not enough to make you good. It's that he also is shooting 44% from 3 and has 30 points last night for us talking 2 nights ago for when the game will be held between the Pacers and Raptors. Like, he's just so electric, and there's not a good way to contain him because he's so good at shooting and coming around screens and going right at your tall dudes. I think the Raptors have the kind of team that can slow him down, but no one has really been able to yet. It's so rare for a rookie to be this good.
Yeah, I mean, he's a blast. And like you said, that Halliburton-Mathurin duo, I mean, you're starting a rebuild. It's not a bad place to start from.
Yeah.
There are a lot of teams who have had way less on hand for their early stage rebuilds and sometimes never get guys that good as they rebuild. Orlando, they're good now, I guess. 10 years later, it's not like they wasted any time getting Paolo Banchero. Let's talk about the elephant in the room with the 5-6 Indiana Pacers. It's not quite as large an elephant as it is with the Utah Jazz, but they've been better than expected out of the gate. And Victor Wembanyama looms very large, 7 feet 4 inches in the air. He's very good. Everyone seems to really want him. The Pacers seemed like they were going to be like on a one-way track to the bottom of the Eastern Conference and the top of the lottery odds. That's very well still possible, I would assume. But what are your impressions of the sort of early start? Is there like alarm in Indiana that they've started this well and that it might sort of sewer their Wembanyama odds? Or are people being sane about this and saying, "Oh, the basketball team's playing cool, fun basketball. Let's enjoy this now and not worry too much about tanking for the speculative teenager"?
I actually think it's been the latter, which is surprising to me given.
I love to hear that. Winning is cool is the thing. Winning rocks. It's fun.
Well, winning is fun, and I think I talked about this before this season. Like the most fun seasons for fans are when they have no expectations coming in, and then 100%. The team is good, right? Like that's what made Victor Oladipo's first season in Indiana such a blast. Beyond that, they of course were good, is that everybody thought they'd be bad, and so every game they won. Like it took like 50 games for everyone to finally like click. Like, oh wow, they're good. You know that this Pacers team is not as good as that team, but exceeding expectations is fun, and I think people have enjoyed that. There will be a point where everyone says, okay, like let's be realistic about the long-term outlook of this team. But the pump the brakes factor a little bit. They are 5-6. They've looked good. Like New Orleans was a good win. They beat Miami. Jimmy Butler didn't play. They beat Brooklyn, which is not a good win anymore this year. They beat the Wizards.
The Raptors lost to the Nets earlier this year, and I kind of feel like maybe they should get contracted as a result.
Yeah. So 4 of their 5 wins are against like, kind of team. The Pelicans win was really impressive. That was their best game of the season. And they almost beat Denver on Wednesday. They blew an 18-point lead. So they had like, obviously it's easy to say context of who they've beaten. It's not like so impressive, but they've looked good is the factor that makes it not matter who they've beaten. Is like their offense is fun. They clearly have a plan. All their young guys are better than expected. The vets fit in. Like the plan makes sense. The team is fun to watch. So it sort of doesn't matter if their wins are good or bad. It's just like, oh, cool. You know, the Pacers aren't as a slog anymore like last year when they were trying to play through the post a lot, and it just didn't work. The team just didn't work. So yes, people are enjoying it. It has been fun, but I also think contextually, given they haven't beaten anyone amazing, they're still probably going to be closer to the Wembanyama sweepstakes when the season ends, and especially because eventually they'll have to make some tweaks just as the season progresses. It's how it goes.
Sure, yeah. I mean, look, maybe they'll trade Miles Turner finally. It's like year 10 of this unending trade saga.
We podcasted together about the Raptors and Pacers. Something like this.
So let me ask you, Tony, will they trade Miles Turner this year, or are they going to extend him and then make him trade bait for the next 5 years after that as well?
Yeah, Miles has been great this year.
He's dropping 40 burgers. Yeah, he's incredible.
He's been great. Last December, he said he feels like a glorified role player at times. Like he doesn't play the 5 on offense as much. So to me, it was kind of important for him to play well at the beginning of the season, not just for the Pacers to have, happy feelings about his trade value, but also so he can, be like, okay, I'm as good as I think I am. He's been good so far. He had 2 duds of games for sure, but he also got hurt on opening night. But mostly has been really good this year. The difference between this year's Miles Turner trade talk and every other year's Miles Turner trade talk is his contract expires this year, right?
Sure,
so for a rebuilding team unless they're like 10 games over 500 at the trade deadline, which realistically is not going to happen, they have to think about the long-term future of the team. It's more important. It happens every single year at the deadline. Now, this will be weird because there'll be less sellers because of the super tall French kid we already talked about, but they have to consider it. Like it's Miles Turner said that himself on the Woj pod with Adrian Wojnarowski. He's like, it'd be stupid even if they don't have doing. He's like, it'd be bad business for them not to, because my contract expires. They can't lose me for nothing. So while in the past they've obviously talked about it, especially in the context of him being with Sabonis, but this year it's way different because of his contract situation.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll be keeping an eye on him as a potential Raptors guy, as I guess we have been for the last 4 years.
Raptors always in the mix, it feels like.
It never ends, and I think honestly, it's got more legs now because we've seen with Christian Koloko the way he's kind of, proven that if he's at the back and the rest of the Raptors defense is doing its crazy scrambly thing and you have an actual rim protector back there to clean up the messes, the Raptors defense goes from pretty scary to, oh my God, we're never scoring again. And so, if they find that Koloko maybe isn't quite ready for night to night, consistent performance, which, I don't think it's fair necessarily to even ask him to be as a second round pick. I could totally see them being like, all right, well, Miles Turner, it's going to take a bit for us to cobble these salaries together to make it all work. But certainly something I think they'll explore because that's the exact type of dude who might be able to tie this whole thing together that the Raptors are doing. It's compelling stuff, as is talking to you, my friend. Should we wrap this thing up there?
I think we should. I'm excited for this game. Hopefully it's not like last year's final Pacers-Raptors game where there's like a fire in the arena and the Raptors win by 45 and all these dudes are watching March Madness on their phone in the locker room during the game because the building's burning down. So hopefully this one's a little more fun than that.
Yeah, here's hoping. It would be a delight to see a fun game. And, again, Halliburton Mathurin's kind of duo that has given the Raptors some issues. So, and the Raptors will be on the second night of a back-to-back as well, having played the Thunder the night before. So, should be a challenging one for Toronto. They're in this kind of stretch of their schedule. They'd like to pick up some wins while Pascal Siakam's out against presumptive tanking teams. But feels like one of these against either the Thunder or the Pacers for them is going to be a bit of a trap bite you in the butt game. Hopefully, it's not for Raptors fans. But if it comes at the expense of the Pacers and it makes Tony East happy, I'll make my peace with it.
Should be a fun game. I'm sure we'll both be talking about it on our respective shows come Monday. You can follow me on Twitter for now, I guess, at TEastNBA, depending on how long that website is still around. And Sean's over there at Woodley Sean, covering the Raptors over at Locked On Raptors as well. Do you have anything else to plug before we get out of here?
I got a new Substack. It's called Post Touches. You can just go and subscribe over at Substack, and you'll get my weekly little blog posts. It's just a way for me to, hence the name Post Touches. I just need some touches with them posts, man, because I'm without a writing home this year, so this is helping me just put whatever's in my brain on a page in some sort of coherent fashion. So go check it out. Post Touches is my Substack.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to both of these shows. Locked On Podcast Network. We cover every team in every league, your team every day. Available on every podcast app as well as YouTube, where you can see us smile and wearing our Grizzlies/Zach Randolph memorabilia, which was not coordinated. Crazy stuff. How that worked out. Everybody have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.